Is everyone okay with me recording? Yes, I guess so. Let's do a quick, thank you. Let's do a quick round of introductions, just very brief. Everyone can just say their name and briefly why they're here, and then we'll start with the presentations. I think some of the presenters aren't here yet. I don't know if they'll make it or not. I had it open earlier. Who's presenting when? But now I closed it. So I'm going to start. I'm Aviv. I'm one of the three conveners, the only one who can be here for time scheduling reasons. The other two are Molly and Heather that are in New Zealand and in Canada. They're not normal hours there, so they're not here. So, and this is about, we're part of kind of like a conversation about art and community economies, diverse economies that's been going on from before even the last conference. So we're trying to explore that, and there's also been talk about maybe organizing some sort of exhibition and or a book that kind of addresses from different angles this topic of art and community economies, artists and community economies. Should we, I'm just gonna move, right. Anna, do you wanna say something?
Sure. Ana Eras, estoy en Buenos Aires, son las 9 de la mañana, it's 9 a.m. here in Buenos Aires. It's getting pretty hot these days, so approaching summer. And I had been part of the ArtSpace Community and Diverse Economies call since last year with Aviv and Leo Huang and Molly. I'll talk about that story later when I introduce my notes for this talk. And I'm very excited to be here because this year, 2021, due to reasons of my teaching and research and everything else, I wasn't very much able to meet with a group who has continued to meet. So I'm very happy to be here and try to think through the issues that actually prompted my interest when I first joined the idea of doing these kinds of things together. So I'll talk about that more later. I don't want to spoil my talk.
Christina, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Christina. Over here it's 1 p.m. so good afternoon. I'm in Malta. I'm Maltese and I'm currently based in Malta. Well, why am I here? I'm an artist, socially engaged community artist, and I have throughout the past year I have encountered the community diverse economies approach. So I'm pretty new to the setup. So yeah, I mean, I'm just understanding better, also because I have some projects which are taking more that direction. So I'm looking forward to see how it opens up and yeah, how it will proceed and how other people are also in the arts making use of this approach.
Thank you. Bianca, can you talk or are you still on the bus?
Yeah, I'm still on the bus. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm getting off in a moment. Actually, I'm just, if there is someone else who can present who they are, and then I get off and I can speak.
Yes. Wendy, would you like to say something?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I've been sort of involved in the community economies, looking at art for a little while now, a few years, and basically bringing it into my teaching and some of my methodologies. I work at the International Institute of Social Studies at Erasmus University. I'm a professor there. So I'm also using it as a feminist political ecologist. So I'm sort of combining different ideas as well as community economies in a with PhDs and MA students as a postgraduate college, but also in my own writing. So, which I've done a little bit of and published. So I'm very interested to hear how other people are working with it. I'm also one of these people that thinks that everyone can do art. And I think I've learned that through the community economies somehow, because I think it's been really useful to use art to express what people are perceiving and understanding as economies and also their performance of them. So I've actually really interested to hear how people are doing it now. I could give lots of examples of not myself, but of others that creating spaces to allow artists, however one defines that, to think these ideas through. Thank you.
Bianca, do you want to say something?
Yes, now I got off the bus. Hi, everyone. I'm Bianca Elsenbaumer. I'm calling from the Italian Alps. And I'm a design researcher working with spatial practice. And I would say something that in art, in design, they would say it's too arty, and in art, they say it's too designerly. So somewhere in the middle with my practice. And I just want to share the panorama with you. I thought I could do like a presentation showing where I am, but actually maybe I can just turn my phone around. And it's very foggy today. It just snowed on the mountaintops. And later I will talk a bit about what I do in this landscape. And I pass to someone else who wants to introduce themselves.
Asa, do you want to talk? Maybe she can't hear us. Hello. Unmute yourself if you can.
Sure. Hi, everyone.
Hola.
Hola. Some I'm meeting for the first time, some I know from elsewhere.
Where are you at now?
I'm in Malmö. I've just had a sort of delayed lunch break, and my tea kettle is boiling, so I'm going to go and fetch that, and I'll come right back.
So, Ignacio, yo supongo que tú quieres quedarte silencioso o quieres decir algo.
Voy a saludar de todas maneras. Hi, I'm Ignacio, and I'm in charge of opening the Zoom. So, but I think I'll stay for most of the session because I find it the topic very interesting indeed. I do work with my partner Alison Guzman in southern Chile with the Mapuche people in co-designing paths towards community economies. So, thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Ignacio. I think that's everyone. Did I miss anyone? No, I think that's everyone that's here. Anna, do you want to start? Do you want to do your presentation? So the idea, the structure of this is we have, I think, just a few presentations. They're each going to be 12 minutes. And then hopefully we'll still have time to have a bit of a conversation between everyone. So, Ana.
Gracias. Let's see if I can you see my screen? Yeah, good. Okay, so we are here at ABCDE. Actually, I missed the E on that title, which is the ArtSpace Community and Diverse Economies approach, as we named it last year when we started getting together with Aviv and Leo Juan and Molly Mullen to think about how arts relates to community economies and diverse economies approach. And out of that work, we put together a chapter that actually, Aviv, I'm not sure whether it went out officially, but it was a very good exercise that we did together in thinking how to spell out the core ideas of community economies and diverse economies, about what community is all about, and how that relates to the work of artists, or how the arts inform the work of community and diverse economies. And in doing that, we actually took an approach based in the arts to do the writing. So we sort of did the conceptualizing through playing with some ideas related mostly to visual arts and music, as I recall it. Aviv, maybe you can talk about that later a bit more if we want. But out of that work, what I've been trying to do with what we put together at that point is to keep on thinking about how this approach informs my teaching at the university, mostly with undergrad students. And with that, I need to give you a bit of context. I teach at a public university in Argentina, which is free. In Argentina, we have gratis free education from kindergarten to the university. The graduate courses are not free, but usually they're sort of not expensive. So, and all in all, education is fairly accessible to students. There's other issues one may discuss, which are the graduation rates and so on and so forth. I won't go into that now, but just to provide a context for that, I want to explain that I will be talking today about two courses that I teach at the undergrad level that are related to introducing students who are going into education degrees into main ideas about epistemology and methodology for doing research. So in doing that, what I've been doing is relating my research with the teaching I do by bringing into my teaching some of the core ideas that I'm developing in the research that I do, which are related to how people learn to generate knowledge with or through projects that are not hierarchical. They are autogestionados, as we say. In English, the word may be self-management, but it's not a word that describes very well what we mean by autogestionado. So the focus of my research is on trying to understand how groups and people who say get together a cooperative of workers, how do they learn to do the process that entails to be self-managed and self-governed, that is, take and make decisions about their collective owned property, how to work and be a peer and make decisions in a horizontal way, which are ways of being in the world that are not usually taught in our institutions as we know them. Usually, at least in Argentina, it is very common that there is a sort of common sense hierarchical and bureaucratic structure in our minds and in the groups we form and we belong to. So this approach is in a way different than the one we're used to, but in very many ways it exists in Argentina in very many situations. More specifically in Argentina after 2002 and 2001, actually, the big crisis hit and lots of people were on the streets, and partly what they were advocating for was this taking part of making decisions and, for example, recovering factories and enterprises that had been down, and they did that through this process of autogestión. So this is the topic I'm looking into. And so what I bring into the teaching is what you're seeing on the right-hand side, which are theories that relate to how is it possible to understand this way of making the processes be collective, and what does that mean in teaching when we teach? What what can we bring into our teaching to make that happen? So in this way, I conceptualize my teaching as learning as well. And so, and over the years, not only now, but I've been teaching for a long time because because of my age, I mean to say. So anyhow, there's this issue about power. If we teach thinking that we learn when we teach, what do we need to interrogate or ask ourselves? And in which ways, what are the kinds of methodologies that we need to bring in to make that happen? So in doing that at the university, I've been in the last 2 years taking advantage of the fact that I've been speaking with the colleagues of the Community Economies Network, in particular in regards to arts, because what I'm going to show you in a bit is how I've been introducing the arts, mostly visual arts, in my teaching, and how that is making sense to students to make sense of what we do together, and sometimes of what we read and discuss, which at some points for some of the students may be far away from the point they're at when they enter the university, but spelling the ideas out through art has been interesting and useful to getting to the content we teach. So here's a little bit of a timeline of what happened in 2020, which I already spoke about, so maybe I'm not going to use the time to explain this again. I just wanted to honor this process that has been helpful for me in conceptualizing what I'm talking about now. And this is what I just said, that it's interesting for me how this constant dialogue in my head and with my colleagues, the team I teach with, has been useful to bring in an arts-based approach. And in doing that, partly what I'm bringing into the classroom at the undergrad level is this notion of community that we wrote about in that article that I spoke about. And in doing that, again, this notion of power, what happens when you want to open up how decisions are being made in your teaching with the team you teach with and the students, and you are trying to conceptualize that as a learning community, and one in which knowledge is not only shared, but also is the property, collective property of us all, of a group working together. So in that sense, what I've been thinking about is that it's important to democratize availability and access, and I'm differentiating here, making available things that we use for our teaching and learning, and accessing them. And I'm taking this out of the work of a researcher whose name is Judith Kalman, and she has been working mostly in literacy. And her point is that as humans, we are surrounded by different kinds of materials that would allow us to learn literacy. And in that sense, there's lots of available material around us, but that doesn't mean that necessarily we have access to it. She brings the example of someone who, quote unquote, cannot read in the sense of alphabetization, being alphabetized, but they can read otherwise if some cues are brought in for them in ways that access can be granted to content. So taking that view, what I'm finding is that lots of the students that I work with, because of their educational trajectory, when they enter the university, they are not at that point able to have access to some of the materials we want to share with them. So it's not only an issue of having the materials or the readings or the videos we use or the movies we use, because we also teach by using movies, but also of providing some cues to grant access to the content. So something that I've been finding is that when we show students that we can use visual arts to start spelling out our ideas, that means they understand very quickly that arts can, as Wendy said, arts can maybe be done by anybody who wants to be an artist, at least for a while, in the sense that arts is a way to explore ideas and content, and also relationship with others. And so in that way, we are trying to show them that it is possible to access reading by taking the road of visual arts. And so I will show you a couple of examples, one example of one student and one example of what I show my students, so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. I'm going to name this student Mary. Her name is different, but I'm going to call her Mary. Students sign a consensus, an agreement to have their material be shown to other people in contexts like this. So I have permission to show her material. And this is a picture this person drew about herself when we started the course in 2020. We had to teach virtually because of pandemics. And so she used this illustration because we asked them to introduce themselves in writing, but we also said, if you'd rather use other ways of introducing yourselves than writing, please feel free to do that. And she drew herself as a kid. This is herself as a kid and her mom on the left. And she said this was her feeling in this first course she was taking at the university, our class, that reminded her of herself when she started school. So this was her first take into sharing her way of doing art, to think about something we were asking them to think about, which was their trajectory in education. This is another piece she put together. And here what she did was that she went to look for her notebooks when she was 7 years old at school, when they were teaching her about Columbus Day in Argentina with a very colonial approach, which she was able to identify because one of the readings we asked them to read is this text by Frederick Apfel-Margling. She's a Canadian researcher. And in this text, which is very dense and difficult text, the author presents a history of colonialism, in particular in Peru. And the goal of this chapter is to show that the educational institutions in Peru were not only in the past informed by colonialism, but that colonialism has persisted over time. So the student I'm calling Mary chose to go back to her, as she called it, her treasure, which is all the notebooks she's saved of her schooling history, and brought up these examples of her illustrations at that point. I mean, it was more her coloring of the illustrations that the teacher had given them. And she reflects on this in writing. So what I'm showing here is that, again, she chose, and she's not the only one, but she chose to do this, to go back to her own history as a student, to go back to the drawings and coloring she was doing, to think through the thematic, the themes that that chapter we were asking them to read were bringing up for her. And I know I'm just 2 more minutes.
So yeah, I'll let you continue a little bit, also because Caroline's not here, but
yeah, I'm aware of time. I put my clocks. I think I have 2 more minutes. So I'm running as fast as I can. So over the course, what happened to this student was that she was able to start using that framework that we provided them to look into, because one of the main goals of the course is to make students aware that there's lots of epistemological perspectives and that each of them has a view of the world. So that's something we try to bring to their attention. And so for her, this meant that she was able to express her sexual orientation over the course, which she hadn't done in the open until this point. It would take me a long time to explain how she did that in relationship to the content of the class, but I thought that the illustrations would provide you with a sense of what I'm talking about, which is how in expressing herself through pictures, she was able to bring up and out content that has been in her mind for a long time. And one of the questions she asked herself was, why is usually education so grounded into repressing difference, and why is not difference usually being discussed in the open? So that was one of the questions she had. In the interest of time, I'm going to walk you very fast through the next slides. This is some of the readings we did and some of the readings, quote unquote, she provided, which are, if you take a look at the two in the bottom, those are Nickelodeon series that she reinterpreted in light of everything we had been discussing, in particular, the relationship between characters of the same gender and speaking in the open about sexual orientation. So here I'm going to show you some of the quote unquote art I show to my students that I do. So these are blogs that I used to teach, and this is the kind of material that we put out. And here on the right, you're seeing a picture that was that a student drew. Then in the middle is my art, and on the left, it's the portfolios they put together and we share at the end of the semester. This is another piece that I put together for teaching purposes. And these are other pictures that I put together for teaching purposes. And again, my point here is to show you that I could not consider myself as an artist by any means in the regular sense, because artists would not consider me an artist. But what I'm trying to say is that I would like to discuss with you, what does it look like when professors take risks like I'm doing with showing my students my art, and maybe asking them to reflect through art in relationship to the reading and the content we're putting together. Sorry, my presentation maybe was a bit messy, but I thought I would put out like things that we can discuss later. Gracias.
Thanks, Ana. Just if anyone has just any very, very technical questions for Ana, something they didn't understand, because then maybe we'll have the more kind of debate after the presentations. Does anyone have something that like maybe they need? Asa.
Yeah, a kind of technical question. Did you have set learning objectives? Or did you somehow have to navigate around learning objectives, or maybe even suggest changes the coming year?
Yeah, I can talk about that later on when we discuss, because there's a lot to be said about that. Just one thing I want to say is that I do have to I have a curriculum that is set by the university, but I've been finding ways of putting a discussion about that. I mean, bringing up a debate on the content. So
cool. So maybe Bianca, do you want to present next?
Yeah, I can be next to share who I am and what I'm doing. So my plan was to tell you a bit of what my practice is about, and then what I'm working on at the moment, because on that it would be really be great to get some feedback as well. So as I said before, I'm Bianca Elsenbaumer. I'm Italian, and I work in the Italian Alps as a design researcher working with participatory practice. And I work in the Vallagarina Valley, which is just part of where I'm standing now. Maybe I can also turn my camera around in a moment, where 5 years ago, I started to work together with my partner, who is also a design researcher, to work on a 40-year trajectory on commons. So we want to try out in practice what design practitioners and the participatory spatial practice can bring to revive commons, to protect commons, to reestablish new ones, and to use community economies in that process. Because somehow to us, commons feels like a kind of utopian distant idea, because it's about shared ownership of land especially, whereas it feels like community economies can be a way to get there. It's about creating economies that are ethically negotiated between humans and Earth others. And we feel that that's something we can really start to do in our everyday, which can have larger repercussions. And at the moment, I'm finishing up a 2.5-year research project funded through the EU, which is called through a Marie Curie grant, which actually allowed me to move from the UK, where I worked before, to move to Italy and to really dive into the context that was already my research arena before. And I thought that today, as I said, I didn't want to put together a presentation. I thought, why not just take you into the place where I work and show you around? So this is the one part of the Vallagarina Valley. And the Vallagarina is a system of different valleys that I work with. And at the moment, I'm kind of higher up in one of the side valleys, where last year, as part of my research, I've established, together with 9 families, a forest kindergarten, where we take our kids in a kind of experiment with forest pedagogy teachers to think in practice about what a post-humanist education could look like. So what would it be like for our kids to grow up here and to really get a connection to the mountains, to the forests, to the plants and the animals that inhabit the space with us? And so in about 1 hour, I need to pick up the kids, because on Mondays, it's my turn to take the whole bunch down to the valley with the public transport. So I thought, let's just combine these things. And the forest kindergarten, which is just maybe 10 minutes walk from where I'm standing now, is part of a network of spaces that I've established with other people I work with in the valley. So next week, we're finally going to open a community academy at the local train station. This is something that we have worked on over the last 4 years, together with the municipality, 10 other local associations that are into culture and into social work. And the space, we really see it as a kind of incubator for community economies in this valley district. As a space where, and I think this connects really well to Anna's work, where bottom up, we want to explore what can community economies be, what is community, and what is a solidary yet open, transformative community. And there we run lots of workshops. It's just like a very exciting space to be in, because finally we have one space where we can meet and exchange ideas, rather than all being dispersed in our villages and really finding it rather difficult to connect. And there, as it took us quite a while to get into the train station space, and we had a lot of organizing to do to get it, we started a project in partnership with Katrin Böhm in London and with Kate Rich in Bristol, which is about producing fizzy drinks with local flavors. And this was about us and the people we work with having a lot of energy to put into our being together and exploring how we can live differently in the valley. And so we established this drinks company, where now we handcraft in our own production lab fizzy drinks with local flavors. Next week, it's going to be the 4th drink that is going to be, I mean, they have decided on the flavor last week. It's a tonic with local herbs, with mountain herbs. And next week, Fabio, my partner, he's running a lab where we're going to define the label. What does it look like? What's the name of this thing? And then we're going to start producing it and selling it. And I mean, this is a really minor kind of production line. We make something like 12,000 drinks a year. But the drinks are such a fantastic tool to engage people in discussions about how does this valley, you know, smell like? What does it taste like? Do we actually like it? Because down in the valley, it's full of monoculture. So up here, you know, it's kind of wild, but as soon as you get to the bottom of the valley, apple monocultures and grapes monocultures are just everywhere. And we want to challenge that idea that that's the only thing we can produce here. And then part of this network is a community garden we established, and a kind of, it's called Forno Vagabondo, roving bread oven, I think would be the translation. It's a bread oven on a cargo bike with which we tour around different villages, and we bake bread in playgrounds and in local squares, with, you know, with grain that comes from here. And it's about engaging people through making in issues of food sovereignty, which of course we don't say it's about food. I mean, we don't use these academic words. We thought we just say, you know, it's about where does our food come from? What right do we have to good food and so on? And how can, especially, how can we organize together to actually make this happen and to make it available? And this is pretty much what I've been doing over the last 5 years, getting this network of community spaces together. Oh, the Rolling Stone oven, nice. Instantaneous translation is super cool in the chat. So this is what I've been doing over the last 5 years, really thinking that it was this whole, the commons were about the social space we create. And in this process, I learned from legal scholars that actually over, you know, up to 50% of the land that we're looking at here. So, you know, if we look at these mountains, 50% of that land has actually common rights attached to them, which means that every village, people can self-organize to co-manage their own forest, their own meadows, and so on. But the whole thing is that no one is doing it. Or I mean, very, very few people do it. Mostly it's like older men getting together to take care of this, because it's seen as something outdated. Why would we take care of our land-based commons, which are basically, you know, they are pictured as being high up on the mountains where you take your cows, and we don't have cows, so we don't need them. And we don't heat our houses with firewood, so we don't need the woods. And actually in this kind of, you know, conversation with the legal scholars, I got really interested in what is really going on behind this kind of quite flat, banal story that is being told of, like, you know, that they are outdated. And together with my partner, we started to make maps of a few villages of where these common lands are. And it was really cool for us to see that actually these commons are right in the middle of the villages as well. They're also very close to the towns we have. So we have, like, the largest town is 40,000 people, but just, you know, 10 minutes bike ride out of the town and still on its municipal terrain, you have commons that actually, you know, people could just organize and you know, take them over, do something with them. And that's kind of what I want to work on over the next 10 years, I would say, to get people together and to use also the community economies narrative and approach to reimagine how these commons can be useful for us today. How can they be part of our life, of our livelihoods? And this is very much about thinking, you know, on the one hand about the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss, and to think like, how can we start to tackle this from our lives, from where we are, bottom up as civic society. But that also to think, can we actually inherit these commons differently in a non-patriarchal way? And when we activate them, can we activate them in ways, you know, that are, yeah, I would say, you know, shorthand, that are informed by a feminist reading of the economy, where we really think that everyone who lives in the valley with us is an actor. It's the plants, it's the animals, it's the humans, it's the institutions, it's the rocks, it's the rivers. And to play with that and see what kind of, you know, ideas and visions we can come up with. And then, as it is my kind of manner of working, it's about creating these narratives together with people, and working a lot on imagination, but then also going into practice and trying to figure out how this can be done. And just starting off these experiments and seeing what comes from there. And that's for me also a device for research, which in design is called research through design. You design something, which in this case could be like a post-humanist feminist economy based on commons. And then you see how it feels, what kind of effects it produces in the world. And that's where you start your theorizing rather than staying in the abstract. And I think that's for me where, on the one hand, the community economies is like super practical and, you know, effective in doing this kind of work, but also the arts-based methods, because the barriers just come down, like Anna said. You really can engage people on a non-textual level. It's pretty amazing, like what kind of, I think, high standard thinking you can get with people who don't consider themselves to be academics and who would just shut down if you start to, you know, use academic jargons or dense texts. So that's kind of what I'm up to here in the Alps. And I mean, I also gonna stop here because I think my time is running out. But yeah, also just saying, I'm here. If someone wants to come to visit, you're always welcome. And this would be pretty much the place where I would take you to. So I thought I'd just take you virtually, which is also nice. Thanks a lot for listening and for being here.
Thanks, thanks, Bianca. Does anyone have any kind of technical clarifications for Bianca before we continue?
I just have a quick comment, which is we can have like an international kindergarten through, you know, university and postgraduate studies thing, educational thing across the world and across languages. So
yeah, I'm up for that. That would be super cool.
Yeah, and in this group we have like 7 different languages, so that's
yeah.
Anyone else wanna? Okay, maybe I'll go. I think because Caroline's not here, I'm gonna be the last presentation, and then we can have a conversation. I'm trying to see if I can. What do I do to share my screen? I've never done this before. I'm not much of a share screen. Okay. Share. Does that work? No. Sorry about this.
yeah, we're seeing the screen. You need to put the presentation mode.
Mode, exactly. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing here in Hull, and me and my partner, Anna Coromina. It's kind of like a story, and it's quite visual, and it's kind of an exploration through art of our neighborhood and the kind of economies and potential forms of self-organization, self-management, like Anna was saying before, that are here, or that we can kind of participate or help bring into being here in collaboration with others. And but this is it kind of the reason why I'm bringing it in, and maybe some things that I like for people to think about when I'm telling the story, is that it kind of informs some thinking that I have about art that goes a little bit beyond this idea of just methods, even though we are using all sorts of methods that are artistic. We're using, I don't know, material artistic processes as well as others. But I think there's something about the kind of thinking that maybe can come from art, or that's maybe typical of artists, that can inform both like just the kind of learning that can be done, research and economic organizational practice that that can be done kind of in the midst of action. So I mean, there's kind of a conversation there to be had between arts thinking and participatory action research, or whatever you'd like to call it, arts-based research, and these kind of conversations about diverse economies and community economies. So basically the story goes a little bit like this. We, about 6 years ago, we showed up here in Hull, which is a city in the north of England. You know, it was dark, it was raining sideways, and our idea was to, I'm trying to think how I can do that. our idea was to see how we're gonna, we wanted to find a certain neighborhood that we can kind of like immerse ourselves in and work in, because that's a kind of, geographically, that's like our kind of unit of reference is the neighborhood, which is something that maybe could be thought about, could be even criticized, but that's kind of how it was, or maybe probably how it still is right now. So the first thing we did, and this maybe has something to do with these ideas of arts thinking and the kind of the ways of doing that maybe art can bring to the table that's maybe different than science or social science. We started by using this thing called the drift. We started by drifting through the city, looking for a neighborhood that kind of resonated with us. So we made all these different excursions to different parts of the city, and we talked to people. We met people who were doing things in these neighborhoods, and kind of based on the people that resonated with us, the people that we liked, the people that we wanted to spend time with, we kind of chose this neighborhood that now we're living in, that I'm speaking from right now. And we started our first formal project, which was called 3 Stages of Succession. Now, this is like this idea of these projects that like we've done about 4 different projects that kind of go one after the other. But this is really just a formality. Part of the reason why we had to define these projects with a name and that kind of thing is because we were, we needed funding to do them. So we kind of like framed them in this way. But really, it's been a continuous process of hanging out, experimenting with different materials and processes with people as an excuse to have conversations with people. So 3 Stages of Succession is a term that comes from ecology, and it's the idea of how plant life takes over a kind of a terrain that's been abandoned by humans, slowly breaking the soil, small plants slowly breaking the soil, and then deeper roots coming in until finally the deep roots, the kind of more permanent projects, plant life in this case, come in. So we kind of compared it to our kind of tentative exploration of the neighborhood. We were just kind of getting to know things, kind of breaking the ice, and then slowly going into more deep-rooted friendships and relationships, and kind of more, hopefully more deeply rooted kind of practices and conversations. The way we did that was we started by doing a lot of embroidery, a technique we call documentary embroidery, that I was doing with another friend of mine, Vahida Ramoy-Kitch, and an artist that I worked with before, where we did documentary embroidery in different areas. It's like what we found. It's like an easy way to have conversations with people. It's a kind of a non-imposing activity that kind of looks familiar, but kind of looks a bit weird also. That kind of attracts a very specific sector of the neighborhood. Maybe not the same kind of people that would come up to you if you came towards them with a big camera to document. Maybe a different sector of the neighborhood. Maybe the ones that has less or looks for less protagonism. And then as part of this project, we also started a community radio program that we did weekly. Does this continue? Yes. After that, we decided to go slightly deeper, and we were trying to look at the forms of self-organizing in the neighborhood. And we did this through just organizing kind of like a big event, but it was about 6 months of meeting with people and creating sort of decorations and things out of recycled materials, having kind of daily conversations with people, where it ended up with this kind of event that, like you're seeing the pictures now, where we kind of did a walk through the neighborhood, visited different spaces of self-organization in the neighborhood, and had kind of a celebration. So I think what's important for me to emphasize at this point is that the whole process had a kind of an element of Adrift to it, because we didn't really know where it's going to lead us. And we had a kind of a desire to explore the issues of economies, but then it was a bit, it felt a bit unfocused. It felt a bit like we weren't really broaching the subject of economies so directly, at least not in the kind of traditional sense of livelihoods. And we thought livelihoods was a big issue in our neighborhood because there's a lot of people who this isn't like that is an issue for them in the neighborhood. I won't go into a description of what kind of neighborhood it is, but definitely like this is something that we identified as something that's a kind of maybe a common interest of ours and of other people in the neighborhood. Throughout these projects, we were doing this radio show, and that kind of became the kind of axis around which a lot of the things happened. It became a kind of an open space. The radio show was just, it was not a plan. It was an improvised radio show where we just opened space and people just wandered in, had conversations. Once in a while, we'd invite someone deliberately, but mostly it just kind of unfolded as it went along, this radio show. So then actually the order here is a bit reversed, but what we ended up doing is because we had this weekly meetup, which was this radio show, we decided to form a market around this radio show. And I'll show you images from the market lastly, because I think that's where we finally more explicitly are dealing with the issues of economies, like we were kind of intending to do throughout the whole process. But in the meantime, kind of right after we started the market, we did this this other project that also has to do with economies and livelihood, which was a project that was called, what was it called? It was called Economic Portraits of Unlikely Entrepreneurs. And okay, this was the idea, was to create arts-based tools for people who are trying to create, people and groups that are trying to create their own kind of unusual economies. So what we did was we had a team of artists of different disciplines, a puppeteer, a sculptor, an architect, different people. And then we identified several people, with some of them were also artists that were kind of engaging this idea of economy, we thought in an unusual way, in a kind of a way that exemplifies the diversity of economies as it could be. So, and then we had kind of in-depth interviews where our whole team met with people from these different economic projects, these different groups or individuals, and we had a conversation with them, and the artists then came up with different arts-based tools based on these conversations. And these were intended to be kind of maybe alternatives to business plans. It sounds like a bit of a wacky idea, but and it all ended up in a big kind of exhibition. And like what you see in the picture is a pop-up book that me and Anna made based on the conversation that we had with a person who had a business that dialogued with their kind of their mental health situation. So I think we thought that was something. We sat with this person and they actually were giving us a lesson in livelihoods, like unique forms of livelihoods and economies and that kind of thing. So that was Economic Portraits of Unlikely Entrepreneurs, and it ended up like kind of with these art-based tools. Like this pop-up book was kind of an idea of teaching other people what this person that we spoke with taught us. And then there were all these other projects that I don't have time to show you. We also came up with a lot of self-criticism about this project. We thought it's something that needs to be further explored, and was kind of just beginning to explore this idea of arts-based alternatives to business plans and that sort of thing. And now I'm going to show you some images from the market that we had. We teamed with a local organization. It's a housing organization that just purchased an old church. We were using a lot of pop-up books. We were using flowers. This, for example, is a kind of a frame that Anna was doing every week. And she changed the flowers every time, and people would come to the market and get their pictures taken in this frame. So these are some of the people who came. I think I'm out of time. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Stop share. Okay. So now maybe is a time for people to, if people have questions to any one of us three, or comments, or if there's any kind of line of conversation that we'd like to get into. Who's going to start? Who has a question or a comment?
Maybe just, okay. Now I was going to say that I could expand a little bit on the question I was asked before, but I'll pass the word to Wendy because she has a question. So we'll go.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think this is really great, very inspiring. And actually, it was just really a question to Aziz because one of my, MA students who then has now published an article on the apariles, which is this embroidery that women, she was looking at it in resistance to the dams. And I was so interested in what you said, documenting embroidery, documented embroidery.
Embroidery.
Yeah. And I just wondered, is there some connection to that? There's a whole movement, I guess, of which I'm sure Anna knows also very well, but it's very inspiring. And that was exactly an example of, for me, of all the things you're saying. I really learned with her about how that embroidery gave a completely different understanding of the ways women were not just resisting, but just experiencing and living the impact of the dams on their everyday lives. It wasn't using community economies framework as such, but it was definitely using, or at least because I'd gone to this workshop in London some years before, it gave me permission to say that this was a way of learning. And I just wanted, in a way, to share, but also to hear if there were some connections. And just to say that it got published. I mean, no, I don't think anybody's very keen on publishing anything, but she's working with those. She's gone back and is working with that movement against people against dams in Brazil. But at the same time, we published it in Geoforum, which is one of these rather difficult journals to get published in. So I was actually very excited that also happened. I know that's just maybe completely wrong, but I just wanted to say that also felt to me like a bit of a breakthrough, that work was being seen by this well-known geography journal as valid. So I thought, and it had beautiful illustrations, and it was just something to mention, that changing knowledge production and changing how people perceived this as real knowledge, because that was her argument. This is the knowledge of these women, and that we're learning actually about dams. There's all this blah, blah, but actually this was the real experience through this embroidery, through their embroidery.
Yes, can I just say just a couple of things in response? In Hull, in this particular case, we were really just using a very utilitarian aspect of documentary embroidery, which is the fact that it's just a great tool to open a space for conversation. And I found that out because I was, for I don't know if about 10 years with Vajida that I was working with, we were going to all these different places and embroidering, and I saw this happening. But when we were working with Vajida, we always tried to connect to different groups, mostly women's groups that were doing textile crafts. And we found out that what you said is exactly true. Textile was always a form of documentation. It was always a form of explaining the reality around, of telling stories. Even accounting was done through textiles. So yeah, there's like traditions of people documenting through embroidery is it's definitely not something that we invented. More like something that's just like the nature of the actual craft is documentary. Anna, do you want to continue expanding on what you were gonna just say?
Yeah, first I want to say that let's not forget that we said that we're going to do this international educational thing. So let's keep that up. But I just wanted to address the question about whether or not I have to do mandatory stuff at the university, because yes, I do. What's been happening over time, actually this particular undergrad course that I was speaking about has a sort of an interesting story in the way I started teaching it, because I wasn't teaching this course, but I was asked by the university in 2018 to teach it because the person who was teaching it was, what's the word in English? But they were accused of harassment. The professor was sexual harassment. So there was what's called in Argentina, escrache, which is an action that people take by exposing the person who's doing the harassment. And so students organized to do that because this had just happened at the beginning of the quarter. And so the professor was separated from his teaching, and so there was a big crisis, and they asked me whether I could take the course, like, from, say, tomorrow. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. And they're like, well, for several reasons, they asked me to do it. So I said, well, I will, because then I put myself in the heads and feelings of the students, and I said, yes, I have to. So I did. So that's how I started this particular course I'm teaching. So it was a very, very critical situation. And because of that, I was very much interested in opening up the word, if I may use that expression, because I was assuming that there was a lot underneath of what had just happened that needed to be out in the open. So that's how I started to teach this course. So at that point, what I did was I went back to my authorities at the university and I said, I will be teaching the content, but I will be doing some other things because I don't think I can do, the mandatory stuff as if nothing happened. So in a way, that very critical situation allowed me to start this particular course on this foot, which was different than other situations. Because of that, I think I authorized myself inside myself to just, start exploring, like we were saying, that these approaches are done in the doing. So I put myself in that spot and I explained that to the students as well. So even though I was very aware that I had to teach what they needed to learn, because in Argentina, the syllabus goes the curriculum goes as if, like this course, if you don't have it, if you don't take it and have it on your trajectory, then you cannot take other courses because they're linked. So I was very aware that I had to teach them the content as well. But, we sort of, I discussed it with the authorities of the university and also discussed it with the students, because what I do when I teach is that I create a space that is called the assembly. I have a module of 4 hours, which is very good for me because I do like, I can explain something, then we go into small groups and discuss, then we come back together, then we have the assembly. So we have different activities going on and we plan them with students. And over time in this course and other courses that I've been teaching, because this happened in this course, I was able to expand this way of doing things in other courses I teach. And so two things that I want to mention, and with this I'll shut up, because as you can see, I'm a talker, so I need to pay attention to that. But two things I wanted to point out were that, for one thing, this whole perspective that I'm sharing with you about teaching, that comes out of the work I'm doing research about taking decisions together and owning collectively what we do and stuff like that, autogestión, needs to be translated into practices in the classroom. Students often tell me that at this particular university I teach, the discourse that professors have is very progressive, but then their actions are not very progressive. So I'm trying to make it be coherent. So that's why I do this assembly thing and stuff. But then also, for example, I was saying that students give, they are asked whether or not I can share their pieces, but I also give my consent to them to use my work, because we put them all out in a shared digital space. So for example, this quarter, I'm teaching another class that it's about methodology for doing research in education. And we have this shared space, and I ask them to do their research log. And so each of them does their log, and they put it in the open, but I do mine too. And so, and I also signed the consent, my consent form. So if they want to present, actually, this just happened. They had this student Congreso conference, and one of the students presented on the work we are doing, and they shared, so that's what I mean by saying, making it be coherent. And one just final note is that the visual arts piece is very empowering to very many people who maybe struggle to write in your, college form at the beginning, but when they start working with visual arts, somehow they start releasing their energy, and they can put their thinking into words, maybe first orally, and then they can translate into writing. And so that's very empowering. So eso, gracias.
Thank you. I actually have a question for Bianca, but maybe first I'd like to see if someone else has a question or a comment. Alison, you want to say something?
Sure. Thank you for everyone for your presentation. I concur with Wendy, very inspiring. So I have a question regarding the documentation archive. So maybe I can give you a little background. A couple of years ago, I embarked on a journey. I started with the Institute of American Indian Arts. They're a Native American tribal college in the Southwest in New Mexico. And I did an online museum study certificate, mostly linked to what I was gathering here in Southern Chile with the communities, which was the emergence of the importance of maintaining and revitalizing cultural patrimony linked to community economies, and the dynamics and the synchronicities that happen between, environment, local assets, livelihoods, and culture, all kind of merged in together. So I did this 2-year program, which opened me up to a whole world of indigenous-led cultural institutions, Native American archives, Native American ways of organizing their information and their cultural patrimony. And last year, I was able to get a grant for a Mapuche council where I live from the Chile Ministry of Arts, Patrimony, and Culture, so that families can start their first collection, because most of the museums here are all managed by the state. So in this case, the idea was for them to jointly combine their family objects. And again, that opened up the whole concept of livelihoods and basically how this needed to be transferred, this information needed to be transferred to the future generations. In my observation and my experiences, I feel like the youth are kind of abandoned. They're kind of in limbo right now. In a lot of indigenous youth, I feel. I don't know if it's in all over the world, but for sure I see it here, which opens them up to, anyways, I can get into that a little bit another time. But anyways, my question is, this concept of archiving, I feel, has been so relevant in terms of documenting and storing information so that it could be transferred to the future. And in my case, we're talking about traditional knowledge. So meaning, how is this concept of cultural patrimony and the relationship and coexistence with the land, how is that maintained so that future generations can access it and replicate it? I know that you guys are not working in the indigenous context, but it did make me wonder the knowledge that is emerging from these beautiful community synergisms of art and creativity. Have you guys thought about storing that in a way that can be transferred? And I'm using museum tools that I learned in my museum studies program, but maybe there are other tools. I mean, there's documentaries. I mean, there are other ways of storing this information, of inventorying this information. But I was curious to, learn from you if this has been a debate or conversation, whether you have had experience or suggestions in these kind of exercises of basically archiving and inventorying this beautiful information and that's emerging from the community. Thank you.
Does anyone have a?
Maybe I can speak to this a bit. I think in my own work with the groups that I'm part of and that I work with, there hasn't been so much an idea of archiving it, but of sharing it. And for this, what we do a lot is producing zines together. So we produce kind of short text, poems, postcards, drawings, which then we bring together in kind of, I call them zines. It's non-academic publications that circulate in the community and that we circulate online as well, that kind of capture the knowledge that is being produced. Also because in many of the initiatives, people are drifting in and out. People come here and then they might move somewhere else. And so we have traces of this. And the shared making of these zines is actually a pretty fascinating process of just getting together and having these conversations of what is it that we're learning? What is it that we want to communicate? And I have found this, the zines have been effective. And maybe I should think about them in terms of archiving as well.
Just some thoughts about archiving. For me, my experience, kind of like living in the middle of this neighborhood, is that there's always a desire to collect, communicate, to put some order, because you can see how things kind of evaporate if you don't do that. But I think that's really, to me, that's the heart of like some sort of power dynamic, the kind of the having of the time and the mental space to do this kind of ordering and collecting and synthesizing of all this endlessly interesting things that come up in the day-to-day that you also have to kind of respond to. So that to me is like a real issue, this issue of who has the capacity to order, collect, archive, and then communicate, these channels of communications, who has access to them. And it's something that's kind of like a struggle, like a real like physical struggle with time and space in the day-to-day.
Well, also maybe to add to that of what Aviv was saying, I think it's a struggle between how do you sit within in an academic context where all these efforts that the community might be putting into making the zines, but you might be putting into it as well. it just doesn't have any value, I feel. It's really just, you know, something you can do in your free times, in your evenings, but actually it's like you have not published anything. And I think that's a real issue where I like this, you know, I like that Wendy was saying that, at least, you know, in the geography papers, when you take this kind of the work into a more academic context, you can defend it and you can make space for it. But I think it's through means that then are not accessible to the communities that you work with, because it's too abstract, it's too academic, it's in English, which is a big issue, it's a big language barrier.
Could I come in? Because I just want to say, I really agree that it is an issue of time, but one of the things, and archiving has always been like that. I was trained as a historian, and archiving was always a major issue. And we did like women's archives, which then got lost. And it's also about resources as well. And then this sense of being too much information. But just to mention that with the students I work with and we talk about creating a community of learning, which is then also including the people with whom they're exploring their ideas, which is often in places that they come from or are working with, not in the academe. And so the idea is that, yes, this woman that I spoke about, she published it in a this geoforum, which was very exciting on one level. On another level, she also then did also herself aparilas with the group and also wrote something with them, in obviously in Portuguese, actually. So it was also very consciously looking at the different types of knowledges and where do they go. But of course, that took a lot more time than any, let's say, a master's students could do. So she was doing that as part of her kind of politics of knowledge, sort of post her degree, and just me supporting her long distance and everything. So I'd be really interested to know how we make these connections, as Anna was saying. It would be very exciting to go in and out of these different spaces. And I really like Aziz, because you seem to have a very creative, very fluid way of working with things and finding what for the community you're working in maybe works, and maybe archiving isn't the point there, but maybe it is in another space. I like the idea of there's no one way of doing it, a prototype for doing it or something. But it's really interesting to hear all the different things. Thank you.
I wanted to add that I went to this session that was hosted by Tim Crabtree in Community Economies Research, this Ljubljana conference. And maybe if you did have the time to watch the video once it's published, because there's lots of connections between what we're talking about here and what he presented there. His session was called something like the space of emptiness and its relationship with community economies work, or something like that. And he sort of challenged and we discussed the notion of emptiness and fullness, and he walked us through his tensions in doing work that, as we're saying, sometimes needs some planning to get done, needs some archiving, needs some work like that. And on the other hand, we also wanted to be open in order to have whatever comes into being be. So that tension was spoken about in that session very much. So maybe it links with this. I wanted to just add that. I also want to make one more comment, sorry, is that at the university I teach, there's a tension, big tension about professors saying that students need to wait in their careers until they can be considered authors. And they have a very strong way of coming out and putting students down. And so that's the context where I teach. I wanted to comment this. And so since what we do goes against that, there's lots of discussions that I go into with my colleagues where they say to me things like, well, not everybody is an author, and students need to learn what's out there before they can speak for themselves, stuff like that. So I'm saying that this colonial approach is everywhere. And anyhow, it's very discouraging. At the same time, it gives me fuel to come even harder with what I do. Harder may not be the word. I mean, stronger.
If I could add, I was putting in the chat, but I mean, there are pockets of people doing this, and that's one of the things I found. So it's wonderful hearing what you're doing, Anna. But the course I've been doing now for 6 years, which began with with the students' knowledge, and Kath and other people have come and spoken at it, and we've used, now I understand it's called ABCD. I didn't know that. That was something I've just learned. But we've basically used that as one of the methodologies for actually thinking of futures together and understanding economies differently and livelihoods differently. But this is a transnational classroom, so it's different. It's not just one place. So it's actually also communicating across all these diversities. So it's quite complex to manage. But still, I have to say that I had a huge amount of resistance to it, but I got a lot of support from different people coming in, like even getting someone to be the reviewer of the course who was sympathetic, and that made a big difference. So now we really, and unfortunately, I don't think this is particular. The idea of decolonizing suddenly becomes the big thing at the moment in Europe, but that's also opened up spaces to really rethink the ways in which you teach. So, but at the same time, I really this idea of professionalizing or learning together. Students also are coming and they're paying for this. So some of them also reject the idea that you're learning with them. They're saying, well, we're paying for something from you. So there's a lot of needing to talk through, not only with professors, but also with students, because the course I do is obligatory for all students, which is great, but you get that pushback. We don't need to talk about that, but that's where art, I found really useful, because that really made them able to show things differently, or maps or whatever we did. Yeah, and just to share that I really feel what you're saying. But yeah.
Yeah, I want to comment a bit on the money issue, because for example, this semester I'm teaching, and then the university has this system by which students who are advancing in their courses can ask to be paired up with a professor to learn how to do stuff. In this case is how to teach at the university. So I have 3 people working with me. So the first thing I did was I said, I am a professor and I'm being paid to do this. And so I want to discuss with you guys whether we all need to be paid and how, and whether, for example, we need to share my salary, which I have done in the past. I have to say that our salaries are so bad. I'll try to translate. It's like I get the equivalent of, I think it's $100 for month. That's what I get as salary. So you can imagine that if I share it in 4. But anyhow, I put it up for discussion because I thought, I know they're supposed to be learning, but the way we teach, we are all working together. So I put that up for discussion. The 3 women this time decided they didn't want to get monies. Each of them gave their reasons why, so I accepted that. But in the past, I have had experiences where I put this out for discussion and we share the salary. And that's one of the topics that is also discussed at the assembly with my students, because I teach at the night shift. In the university, there's 3 shifts, and I teach at the night shift. I want to teach at the night shift because this is the shift where Most likely students either work full-time or part-time, and that's why they take the night shift for the courses. And the issue of money and living out of your salary and all that is out in the open. So those are issues that are very sticky in a way. But I think that it's good that we can find a way to put them in the open. I don't know if we're drifting far away from the core themes of this session, but anyhow.
I think actually, in a way, we're not. I think a lot of the themes that were touched upon, these power issues, also this idea of archive, I think it has, for me, it has a lot to do with this idea of arts and the way art can do some sort of reframing. And there's like one element, I mean, art does many things. I don't want to speak in the name of art, but I think one thing that art can do sometimes is break down structures and disorder things, which is helpful for reframing like a power dynamic. So when you're talking about, for example, this issue of archives, which I think in the kind of like maybe standard sense of it, maybe is associated with a certain ordering, maybe art can help break that order and think of other kinds of archives, other kinds of forms to communicate, and by that having power that are, you know, maybe can dialogue better with the kind of messy realities of people who, you know, have a hard time with order for various reasons, maybe just for being messy people, or maybe for socio-political economic reasons. I don't know. I think we're officially supposed to end, but maybe we can have like just a quick, if anyone wants to add anything, especially if anyone who hasn't spoken, maybe we can have some just few last words from these people if they'd like to. Or we could have an uncomfortable moment of silence also.
That was the topic that the student presented at the conference, silence in the classroom, which is a very interesting topic of research.
Last call for thoughtful words about this, even people who have spoken, or should we end it?
Can I show one slide that I didn't have a chance to show? It's just my ending slide. I didn't get to it, but I want to show it because I think it, in a way, am I sharing my screen?
Yes.
Yes, I am. So, I think that the reason why I was trying to approach this session on the theme of power is because I think we ended up talking about this in very many different ways. And I think there's a theme there that I would love us, the ones who were in this session, to think about writing something together, say next year, embarking in a writing process, also using arts like we did, Aviv, with Molly and Leo, which was so fantastic an experience for me, at least. If you all feel that you could set aside some time to do this next year, maybe we can keep on going, because I also think that it's important that this gets written and put out in the open. But what I was showing here is that there's a need for me to think about power, not only in the sense of power of domination, but these different other ways of conceiving power that are evidently coming through our different talks. So that's why I wanted to show this slide, where I was trying to think about the concepts that I was trying to work with in my work. And mothering power, power in dispersion or dispersed power, power in mutual caring, interdependent position, which of course some of it relates to the work of community economies, and some of these concepts come out of different backgrounds. But anyhow, that's why I wanted to show this slide. Stop sharing and I'll shut up.
I think it's a perfect way to say goodbye to this topic. I hope we get more chances. There's another session with other presenters. I can't even start thinking about the time. For me, it would be 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. But I hope to see you all there, and if not, in other places, and keep talking about it. Thanks, everyone.